A History of Christianity by Kenneth Latourette. Now he's dealing with the First Crusade and the later Crusades, and then with the crusading spirit. He says about the First Crusade, what is called the First Crusade began in 1096, the immediate outgrowth of an appeal by Pope Urban II in a stirring sermon at a synod at Clermont in France in November of the preceding year. The congregation, deeply moved, is said to have boomed out Deus vult, that is, God wills it, and this was made the slogan of the enterprise. The Pope had been asked by the Eastern Emperor for aid against the Seljuk Turks. He was not the first Byzantine emperor to seek such help. A predecessor had made a similar plea to Gregory VII, whom we are to meet again, as we also are Urban II, as a leader in reform in the Western Church and in seeking to enhance the power of the Church in the affairs of men. Urban called on the Christians of Western Europe to go to the succor of their Eastern brethren and also to free the holy places from the hands of the infidels. Plenary indulgence, of which we are to hear more later, was promised to all who took part, and eternal life to those who lost their physical lives in the enterprise. The cross was worn as a symbol by those who responded. Preachers, conspicuous among them Peter the Hermit, spread the message through much of Western Europe. Popular enthusiasm mounted. Throngs, poorly organized, set forth, some of them attacking the Jews or pillaging fellow Christians as they went. Most of this wave perished, some before reaching Constantinople, and others not long after they had crossed into Asia. Much better organized armies left in the summer of 1096, arrived in Constantinople that winter and the next spring, fought their way through Asia Minor, captured Antioch in June 1098 with great slaughter, and the following year took Jerusalem, putting many of its inhabitants to the sword. The most respected of the crusading leaders, Godfrey of Bouillon, was made protector of the Holy Sepulchre. After his early death, he was succeeded by a brother who had the title King of Jerusalem. Crusaders established themselves in various centers in Syria and Palestine, where the ruins of their strongholds can still be seen. Their political structure was feudal, as was natural for those coming from the Western Europe of that day. Rome appointed a patriarch of Jerusalem, and several bishoprics and archbishoprics were set up. Although reunion of all the Eastern churches had not been accomplished under the aegis of Rome, the Western Church had largely extended its holdings and in the East. The Crusaders were far from being ideal exemplars of the faith which they professed, and few, if any, willing conversions from Islam were made by them. The later Crusades. The fall of Edessa in 1144 stimulated what was known as the Second Crusade, for Edessa was a key city in the defenses of the Crusaders' kingdom. That crusade was preached by Bernard of Clairvaux, esteemed a model Christian by his own and later generations. It was, however, a failure, for many of its contingents perished before reaching Syria, and it broke down in its attempt to take Damascus. Muslim divisions had been one cause for the success of the First Crusade. Now the Kurdish Saladin built a strong Muslim state which enveloped the Latin kingdom of its land frontiers. In 1187, in a memorable and decisive battle at Hattin, the European forces were cut to pieces. Jerusalem and most of the Crusaders' centers soon fell to the triumphant Islam. It was to retrieve these losses that the Third Crusade was launched in 1189. 3 armies set out, led respectively by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, one of the most eminent of that long line, the scheming King Philip Augustus of France, and the adventurous King Richard the Lionhearted of England. The emperor came to his death in Asia Minor. The kings of England and France quarreled, and the recapture of Acre was the chief tangible achievement of the costly expedition. The dream of retaking the holy places would not be quieted, and in 1202 the Fourth Crusade set forth, stimulated by Pope Innocent III, whose tenure of that high office, as we are to see, marked the apex of the medieval papacy. It was aimed at Egypt, where was Saladin's chief strength. for crushing him was believed to be a strategic prerequisite to the retaking and holding of Palestine. The Crusaders were dependent upon Venice for ships. Venetian influence turned the expedition to Constantinople. Venice had extensive commercial interests in the eastern Mediterranean, wished an Eastern emperor would be compliant to its wishes, and supported a candidate for the post. The Crusaders stormed Constantinople in 1204, plundered it, divided the Eastern Empire's possessions, and placed one of their number, Count Baldwin of Flanders, on the imperial throne. Venice was given large possessions, chiefly islands, which were important for her commerce. A Latin patriarch of Constantinople was appointed. For the moment, it seemed that the long-cherished papal ambition had been realized, and that the eastern and western wings of the Catholic Church had been united under the undisputed rule of the Bishop of Rome. The crusading conquest of Constantinople was a major disaster for the Christian cause in the East. The Byzantine Empire, already enfeebled, was dealt a blow from which it never really recovered, and which contributed to the weakness that ultimately, in 1453, put Constantinople into the hands of the Muslim Ottoman Turks. Except where overwhelming Latin military power compelled it to do so, the Greek Church did not submit to Rome, but continued under its own patriarch. The Greek masses loathed the Latins, and the rift between the two wings of the Catholic Church was widened and deepened. The Byzantine Empire continued with headquarters at Nicaea, the city in Asia not far from Constantinople, famous in the history of the councils of the Church. In 1261, it retook Constantinople, and the Latin state came to an ignominious end. Of the rest of the Crusades, we need say very little. The distressful Children's Crusade, 1212, was the fruit of emotional appeals, chiefly notable as a vivid example of one phase of the religious temper of Western Europe of the day. Many of the youths who responded to it ended in slavery in Egypt. The skeptical Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, whose stormy relations with the Papacy are one of the complicated sets of episodes of the Middle Ages, through negotiations and a treaty with Egypt, it obtained possession in 1229 of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and the roadstead of Jaffa, and was crowned king of Jerusalem. In 1244, Jerusalem once more fell to the Muslims and was not again to be Christian in Christian hands until the 20th century. Sacred alike to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Jerusalem was desired by all three. Henceforth, for more than 6 centuries, it was to be held by a succession of Muslim rulers. In the 13th century, other efforts were made by Christians to regain it, but none as formidable as the earlier Crusades. Louis IX of France, the ideal Christian knight, led an expedition to Egypt in which he was taken prisoner. He died of disease in an attack on Tunis in 1270, where he had gone on his way to Palestine in the hope of baptizing the local ruler. Prince Edward, later King Edward I of England, took over the leadership, went to Palestine, stormed Nazareth, but did not capture Jerusalem. In 1291, Acre was lost, and with it the last of the Crusaders' strongholds in Western Asia. Although the hope of renewing the attempt to seize Jerusalem was not surrendered for several generations, and as expeditions with that objective, the Crusades were over. He's not through with the Crusades yet, though. He wants to talk about the crusading spirit and the military monastic orders of this period. I put in a link to JW's, that is Jehovah's Witnesses' preferred narrative about the Middle Ages. And that preferred narrative of the witnesses requires that they skip over 700 years of benevolent missions. And the reason for that is they have to get to the 12th and 13th centuries in order to pillory the Crusaders. So, but this was all publicized, by the way, in a million seller, one of the rare million sellers of the early 20th century, and that's the Watchtower book, The Finished Mystery. So here's a sample in this link of what they do with the Middle Ages. See you next time.